The dance of integration. Picture a master gardener tending to a complex ecosystem. In some areas, they add water to parched soil. In others, they provide drainage for oversaturated ground. Here, they build trellises to support climbing vines. There, they prune back overgrowth to allow light to reach smaller plants. This gardener doesn't impose a single approach across the entire landscape, but responds with exquisite attunement to what each section needs. More of one element, less of another, different combinations in various locations, all in service of creating a harmonious whole where every plant can flourish. This is the art of balancing your elemental nature, the conscious cultivation of your inner ecosystem to support optimal functioning and authentic expression. Like that wise gardener, you learn to recognize where particular elements need strengthening, where others require tempering, and how to create the specific conditions that allow your unique potential to blossom fully. This practice isn't about achieving some idealized perfect balance identical for everyone, but about discovering and creating the particular elemental harmony that allows your authentic self to express with greatest freedom, effectiveness, and joy. Having explored your elemental profile in the previous chapter, you now possess a map of your inner landscape, where earth provides solid foundation or needs more development, where fire burns with appropriate intensity or requires modulation, where air offers clarifying perspective or needs greater cultivation, where water flows with nourishing depth or seeks proper containment. This chapter offers practical approaches for working with this knowledge, for adjusting your elemental proportions in service of greater wholeness and more effective functioning across all dimensions of your life. We'll explore specific techniques for building deficient elements, methods for tempering excessive elements, personalized practices for creating elemental harmony, and approaches for adapting your elemental balance to meet changing life circumstances and developmental needs. Through this exploration, you'll develop increasingly refined capacity to work consciously with your elemental nature, not forcing dramatic transformation against authentic tendencies, but gradually cultivating the precise adjustments that allow your unique instrument to play its fullest. Most beautiful music, Sayas. As we begin this exploration of elemental balancing, remember that this practice isn't about conforming to external ideals, but about creating optimal conditions for your authentic expression. The goal isn't homogenized perfection, but dynamic harmony that honors your distinctive nature while supporting your continued evolution. Like that master gardener, you work not against, but with the inherent patterns of your particular landscape, bringing conscious attention and skillful tending to each area according to its specific needs and potentials. While the descriptions found in chapters 5 through 8 offer general patterns of elemental imbalance, your specific manifestations may appear somewhat differently based on your unique constitution, history, and circumstances. The key to effective recognition lies in developing increasingly refined awareness of your personal signals that indicate need for elemental adjustment, your particular forms of rigidity or ungroundedness, aggression or apathy, overthinking or confusion, emotional flooding or disconnection. Some approaches for building this personalized awareness include pattern tracking. For several weeks, maintain brief daily journal noting signs of elemental balance and imbalance across different life domains. This systematic observation helps identify your specific expressions of different elemental patterns, revealing subtler indicators that might otherwise escape notice. Feedback integration. Invite trusted others to share observations about when you seem most balanced versus when particular elements appear excessive or deficient. External perspective often reveals patterns invisible from within your own experience, especially regarding how elemental expressions impact your relationships and effectiveness. Body awareness. Develop increasing attention to physical sensations that accompany different elemental states. Your body often signals imbalance through tension patterns, energy fluctuations, or digestive changes before conscious awareness recognizes psychological patterns, creating early warning system for adjustment needs. Trigger identification. Notice specific situations, relationships, or contexts that consistently activate particular elemental imbalances. These patterns reveal not random fluctuations, but predictable responses to certain conditions, allowing proactive rebalancing before challenging circumstances rather than reactive adjustment after imbalance manifests. This personalized awareness creates foundation for increasingly refined elemental balancing, not generic application of universal techniques, but precise calibration based on your unique patterns, needs, and circumstances. Like learning the specific indicators of your personal vehicle that signal need for maintenance, rather than relying solely on owner's manual. This individualized recognition allows response before minor imbalances develop into significant difficulties. When particular elements appear underdeveloped in your natural composition, deliberate cultivation becomes necessary to expand your functional range beyond innate tendencies. This developmental work resembles physical training. Just as specific exercises strengthen particular muscle groups, targeted practices build capacity in elements that don't naturally predominate in your psychological makeup. Embodiment practices develop greater connection with physical experience, countering tendency toward disembodiment or excessive abstraction. Consider approaches like body scanning, mindful movement, and sensory immersion. Structure development creates supportive frameworks that channel energy productively despite natural tendency toward inconsistency or disorganization. Consider approaches like routine building and environmental organization. Resource stewardship develops sustainable relationship with various forms of wealth: financial, energetic, temporal, material, countering tendency toward depletion cycles. Consider approaches like energy management and financial practice. Time boundaries involve developing clear delineation between different activities. This temporal containment creates sustainable rhythm that prevents multitasking inefficiency and recovery deficits. Manifestation training builds capacity to convert ideas into tangible results. Completion practice involves regularly identifying small tasks to finish from start to end without interruption, gradually building the follow-through muscle. Accountability structures create external supports for maintaining consistency, whether formal arrangements like coaches or classes, or social commitments involving others who expect your participation. Skill development involves investing in building practical capabilities that support manifestation in important areas, recognizing that effectiveness often requires technical competence beyond mere intention or enthusiasm. These earth-building practices work most effectively when approached with patience rather than pressure, recognizing that stable foundation develops through consistent small actions over time, rather than dramatic, transformative moments. Body scanning strengthens neural pathways between consciousness and physical experience, gradually building more continuous bodily awareness. Mindful movement practices like conscious walking integrate thinking and movement, developing capacity to remain mentally present during physical experience rather than splitting attention. Environmental organization creates physical spaces that externalize order rather than requiring constant internal maintenance. Simple systems reduce cognitive load while supporting consistent functioning. Incremental project management breaks larger goals into specific next actions that can be completed in single sessions, creating momentum through progressive accomplishment. Energy management involves tracking your natural energy patterns to identify peak periods for demanding activities versus times better suited for routine tasks or renewal. Financial practice includes making purchasing decisions with awareness of longer-term impact rather than merely immediate desire, contributing to sustainable resource management. Like literal construction that requires laying brick upon brick, rather than attempting to manifest entire buildings instantly, psychological earth development proceeds through gradual accumulation of small, consistent choices. These earth-building practices, when approached with patience, create substantial transformation over time. Building fire, catalysts for transformation. For those with fire deficiency, whose natural tendencies may include apathy, passivity, or suppressed anger, the following practices help strengthen this activating element. Desire reconnection develops greater access to authentic wanting, countering tendency toward motivation disconnection or excessive accommodation of others' preferences. Consider approaches like pleasure inventory. Create comprehensive list of activities, environments, and experiences that naturally generate enthusiasm and energy for you, regardless of their practical utility or others' opinions. This catalog of genuine desires provides foundation for reconnecting with motivation beyond obligation. Values. Clarification. Identify core principles that genuinely matter to you rather than those you've adopted from family, culture, or social groups. This authentic value connection provides fuel for motivated action beyond external pressure or approval seeking. Constraint examination. Explore messages you've internalized about what desires are acceptable, what ambitions are realistic, or what pleasures are permissible. This conscious inventory allows questioning of limitations that may no longer serve your authentic development. Initiative development builds capacity to activate without external pressure, countering tendency toward passivity or excessive waiting for perfect conditions. Consider approaches like graduated activation. Identify small, low-risk actions that stretch comfort zone without overwhelming current capacity. This incremental approach builds confidence through successful experiences that demonstrate capability beyond current limitations. Morning priority. Begin each day by taking action on something personally meaningful before responding to external demands. This practice strengthens self-directed choice rather than allowing others' priorities to continuously override personal importance. Decision training. Practice making choices within specific time frames rather than defaulting to indefinite deliberation. Start with inconsequential decisions to develop the choice muscle without triggering excessive anxiety about potential errors. Energy cultivation increases access to physical and psychological vitality, countering tendency toward lethargy or diminished life force. Consider approaches like physical activation. Engage regular exercise that suits your specific constitution, whether vigorous activities that generate obvious energy boost or moderate approaches that build capacity without overwhelming current resources. Breath practices. Utilize techniques like controlled hyperventilation with appropriate guidance, breath of fire, or other energizing breathing patterns that directly stimulate sympathetic nervous system activation in contained, constructive manner. Environmental optimization. Create settings that naturally increase energy through elements like sufficient brightness, stimulating color, appropriate sound levels, and temperature variation rather than perpetually comfortable but energy-diminishing sameness. Anger reclamation develops healthy relationship with this often suppressed emotion, countering tendency toward chronic accommodation or inability to defend legitimate boundaries. Consider approaches like physical expression. Create safe contexts for releasing anger energy through activities like vigorous exercise, percussion, vocalization, or other forms of intense expression that discharge activation without harmful impact on others. Graduated assertion practice. Expressing smaller boundary preferences before attempting more significant self-advocacy, building confidence that your voice matters and others can handle your authentic expression without catastrophic consequences. Anger awareness. Develop increasing sensitivity to physical sensations that signal anger before conscious recognition, jaw tension, flushed skin, accelerated heartbeat, allowing earlier, more modulated response rather than either suppression or eventual explosion. These fire-building practices work most effectively when approached with self-compassion rather than self-criticism, recognizing that motivation develops through connection with genuine desire rather than harsh internal demands. Like literal fire that requires proper fuel, sufficient oxygen, and appropriate containment, rather than mere command to ignite, psychological fire development proceeds through creating conducive conditions for passion and purpose to emerge naturally, rather than forcing enthusiasm that feels inauthentic. For those with air deficiency, whose natural tendencies may include confusion, narrow perspective, or impaired communication, the following practices help strengthen this clarifying element. Conceptual development builds capacity for clear thinking and analytical understanding, countering tendency toward confusion or overwhelm when facing complexity. Consider approaches like concept mapping. Visually represent relationships between ideas or components of complex situations, creating external organization that supplements internal cognitive capacity. This visual approach reveals patterns that might remain obscure through purely verbal processing. Framework building study organizational structures used in fields relevant to your interests or challenges, adopting and adapting conceptual models that provide effective ways to categorize information and perceive relationships between elements. Precision practice. Regularly challenge yourself to define terms specifically, identify distinctions between similar concepts, and articulate exactly what you mean rather than accepting vague approximations. This discipline builds increasingly refined thinking capacity. Perspective expansion develops ability to view situations from multiple angles, countering tendency toward narrow or binary thinking. Consider approaches like scale shifting. Practice examining situations at different levels of analysis, zooming out to see broader contexts and longer time frames, zooming in to understand specific components and immediate factors. This flexibility prevents fixation at single scale that misses important dimensions. Role consideration. In relationship or group situations, imagine how same events might appear to others based on their position, history, values, and available information. This imaginative exercise builds cognitive empathy beyond emotional resonance alone. Vocabulary building. Regularly learn new terms that allow more precise expression of nuanced concepts, recognizing that expanded linguistic tools create capacity for more sophisticated thinking as well as clearer communication. Structure practice. Before important communications, organize main points in logical sequence with clear connections between elements rather than presenting ideas in order they occur to you. This preparation creates more comprehensible expression. Feedback integration. After significant communications, check others' understanding of your intended message and adjust approach based on what was received versus what was intended. This calibration builds increasingly effective expression. Cross-domain connection. Practice identifying similarities between apparently unrelated situations or fields, noticing recurring patterns that transcend specific content. This pattern recognition builds transferable understanding rather than isolated knowledge. Assumption, examination. Regularly identify premises underlying your conclusions, questioning whether these foundational beliefs warrant the certainty you've assigned them. This inquiry prevents building elaborate structures on potentially faulty foundations. Playful thinking. Engage mental exploration without immediate practical purpose. Thought experiments, hypothetical scenarios, questions without obvious utility. This playfulness maintains cognitive flexibility beyond mere problem-solving function. These air-building practices work most effectively when approached with genuine curiosity rather than performance pressure, recognizing that conceptual development proceeds through interested exploration rather than forced intellectual achievement. For those with water deficiency, whose natural tendencies may include emotional disconnection, empathic limitation, or rigid adaptation, the following practices help strengthen this deepening element. Emotional awareness develops greater recognition of feeling states, countering tendency toward alexithymia or disconnection from emotional experience. Consider approaches like feeling inventory. Several times daily, pause to notice what emotions are present using increasingly specific vocabulary beyond basic categories like good or bad. This regular check-in builds neural pathways for emotional recognition. Body-emotion connection. Explore physical sensations that accompany different emotions, recognizing patterns like chest tightness with anxiety, warmth with compassion, or heaviness with sadness. This somatic awareness provides entry to emotions through their physical expression. Emotional tracking. Maintain brief journal recording emotional states throughout day, noting transitions and triggers without judgment. This systematic observation reveals patterns that random attention might miss. Empathy cultivation builds capacity to sense and care about others' emotional experiences, countering tendency toward interpersonal disconnection or exclusively analytical understanding. Consider approaches like attentive listening. Practice giving full attention to others without simultaneously formulating response, observing both verbal content and nonverbal cues that reveal emotional subtext. This receptive presence develops sensitivity to others' emotional reality. Reflection practice. During conversations about emotionally significant topics, periodically summarize others' expressed feelings before adding your perspective. This mirroring demonstrates understanding while strengthening empathic muscles. Narrative engagement. Regularly expose yourself to stories, through literature, film, or personal accounts, that illuminate diverse emotional experiences beyond your own. This vicarious participation expands emotional range and understanding. Intuitive development increases access to knowing beyond logical reasoning, countering tendency toward exclusive reliance on explicit analysis or dismissal of subliminal perception. Consider approaches like first impression. Noting. Before analyzing situations or people, consciously register initial intuitive response without immediate judgment about its validity. This practice builds awareness of intuitive signals often overlooked in rush to rational assessment. Dream attention. Keep dream journal beside bed, recording images and impressions immediately upon waking without attempting to interpret them. This practice strengthens connection with unconscious material that contains wisdom beyond conscious understanding. Space creation. Regularly engage activities that temporarily quiet analytical mind. Meditation, time in nature, artistic expression, physical flow states, allowing intuitive knowing to emerge when dominant cognitive processes step back. Adaptive flexibility develops capacity to flow with rather than against changing circumstances, countering tendency toward rigid control or binary responses to complexity. Consider approaches like response diversification. When facing recurring challenges, deliberately experiment with different approaches rather than repeating same strategy regardless of effectiveness. This flexibility prevents entrenchment in increasingly misaligned patterns. Comfort with uncertainty. Gradually expose yourself to situations with unpredictable elements but limited risk, building tolerance for conditions that cannot be fully controlled without triggering overwhelming anxiety. Process orientation. Develop capacity to engage experiences for their inherent value rather than solely focusing on outcomes, allowing greater presence with unfolding reality rather than fixation on predetermined expectations. These water-building practices work most effectively when approached with patience and self-acceptance, rather than judgment about emotional inadequacy. Recognizing that depth develops through creating safe conditions for vulnerability, rather than forcing expression that feels inauthentic or overwhelming. When certain elements dominate your natural composition to a degree that creates limitation or imbalance, conscious moderation becomes necessary. This tempering work resembles not elimination but skillful channeling, like directing a powerful river through appropriate banks rather than attempting to dam its flow entirely. Let's explore practical approaches for moderating each element when it appears excessive. Tempering earth. Flexibility within structure. Flexibility development introduces appropriate adaptability within a stable foundation, countering tendency toward excessive consistency or resistance to beneficial change. Consider approaches like routine variation. Periodically introduce minor changes to established patterns. Different routes to familiar destinations, altered sequence in regular activities, new elements within consistent frameworks. Planned spontaneity schedule regular periods specifically designated for unplanned activity, creating contained opportunities for exploration beyond rigid structure without threatening overall stability. Perspective shifting. When feeling resistant to change, consciously consider potential benefits of adaptation alongside legitimate concerns about disruption. Lightness cultivation introduces qualities of play, joy, and ease within responsible stability, countering tendency toward heaviness or excessive seriousness. Consider approaches like pleasure integration. Incorporate elements of genuine enjoyment within necessary structures rather than maintaining rigid separation between responsibility and delight. Non-productive time. Regularly engage in activities valued solely for their intrinsic experience rather than tangible outcomes, whether artistic expression, playful movement, or simple appreciation of beauty. Humor development. Cultivate capacity to find genuine amusement in life's incongruities, including your own tendencies toward excessive control or seriousness. Non-material value recognition strengthens appreciation for intangible forms of wealth beyond physical possessions or financial metrics, countering tendency toward materialistic focus. Consider approaches like relationship investment. Consciously allocate time and attention to nurturing connections with significant others, recognizing these bonds as essential rather than secondary to material achievements or practical considerations. Experience. Prioritization. Periodically, choose meaningful experiences over acquiring additional possessions, building evidence that memories and growth often provide more lasting satisfaction than material accumulation. Generosity practice. Regularly share resources with others through planned giving, spontaneous assistance, or community contribution, experiencing abundance that emerges through flow rather than mere possession. These earth-tempering practices work most effectively when approached without judgment about stability being somehow wrong, recognizing that the goal involves not eliminating this essential quality but preventing its excessive expression from limiting other important dimensions of experience. Tempering fire, sustainable passion. Constructive channeling directs intense energy toward appropriate outlets, countering tendency toward destructive expression or unnecessary conflict. Consider approaches like physical outlet. Regularly engage in vigorous exercise, competitive sports, or other high-intensity activities that provide legitimate expression for fire's natural force without interpersonal damage. Creative expression. Develop artistic or innovative professional pathways that welcome intensity and transformation, creating constructive containers for passionate energy that might otherwise manifest disruptively. Advocacy, direction. Focus change-oriented energy towards specific causes or initiatives aligned with core values, rather than dispersing it across numerous irritations or conflicts. Sustainable rhythm introduces necessary recovery periods within intense engagement, countering tendency toward continuous output that leads to depletion. Consider approaches like energy oscillation. Structure activities in a pulsing pattern of focused intensity, followed by genuine renewal rather than maintaining constant output. Nature connection. Regularly spend time in natural settings with elements of both shelter and spaciousness, experiencing an environment that demonstrates sustainable cycles of activity and rest. Completion celebration. Develop rituals acknowledging milestone achievements before immediately moving to the next challenge, creating psychological spaciousness between intense efforts. Reflective pause introduces space between impulse and action, countering tendency toward reaction without adequate consideration of consequences. Consider approaches like response delay. Practice waiting briefly before responding to provocative comments or challenging situations, creating opportunity for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction.